Hi, welcome to session 2 of Coming Home 2021. It is so good to see you. Last week, the Val spoke about just resilience, and after the year that we had with COVID-19 and a few other things, a few other problems, this at the end of the year or start of 2021, we really need to talk about resilience, and especially resilience in community. Now, what is a community? A community is a group of people living in the same place or having a particular characteristic in common or sharing the same interests. Now, it can be a school community where teachers, learners, and they come together on a day-to-day basis and they share the same space and the same environment. It can also be the area that you live. The people in your street can also be called a smaller community. And also we have what we call a church community where we as believers come together, maybe on a Sunday or Wednesday evening through our small groups to just worship God together as the body of Christ. Nowadays with new technology, we also have what we call virtual communities, and people might be all over the world, but they still share the same interest and they can communicate through various means. It can either be through social media platforms and so forth. But so community is when we share specific things, when we have specific characteristics. Now, when any negative situation or event from the outside hits a particular community, especially if it's a severe event, a big event, that event can destabilize what the community has built for years. So the community is normally made up, like I said earlier, of certain rules, certain culture, a way of doing things. And when a big external event happens, comes into the community, it can throw the community off balance. Many years ago, and those of you who are a bit more mature or a little bit older will remember the Great Depression that hit communities and basically destroyed many people, many communities. When the economic markets fall, when we made investments, we put money aside for later, and we suddenly lose it through one or other event. In 2020, famously, COVID-19 came, and COVID-19 disrupted what we know as community, threatened what we know as community. For some of us, we lost some of our family members. Others might have lost income, a job, the way to provide for the family. So that particular community is now under pressure because of what happened during COVID-19. I want to share with you what happened in the Bible. It's a situation where an external event threatened the Jews. In Nehemiah 1 verse 3, now Nehemiah is working for the king. He's the cupbearer for the king. And Nehemiah wants to know how how his community is doing. The people that is part of who he is. The community that he forms part of. He's a Jew. And he wants to find out, how are our people doing? How are my people doing? And this is the news that he received in Nehemiah 1 verse 3. They said to me, those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down and its gates have been burned with fire. What a description of what the nation looks like. The words used here, the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The walls are broken down and the gates have been burned with fire. This sounds like a crisis. This community has been hit hard. And there are two words that he uses. The first word that they describe um, what the city looks like, what the community looks like, they said the walls are broken. The walls have been broken down. Secondly, they said that the gates have been burned with fire. Walls are broken down. Secondly, the gates are burned with fire. When we talk about walls in the community, we talk about the protection. In those days, the cities were surrounded by walls, and at night, in the evening, they will close the gates to secure the safety of the city. Now, whenever walls are down, it means that this city or this community is vulnerable. This community is are experiencing problems in terms of protection. Some of the walls that might have fallen in communities, in our current communities, might be the wall of integrity. You know, when people say something and they do something else. Another wall is the wall of honesty, just to name a few. Where people now lie more in order to gain access to stuff. There might even be the wall of caring, the wall of grace, where we look at our community and we as a community decide to take responsibility for whoever is in our community. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if the walls are high and if the walls are strong, it means that we only need to close the gates in order to make sure that our community is still okay. Safety, protection, and the integrity of leadership. Now, just for a moment, think about this. If the walls are down and our gates are broken, our gates are burned down. Remember, gates represent authority. The people who are making the decisions relating to the community. How are we going to go forward? What are we going to do next? Walls are broken. Decision making is at a really bad or in a really bad space. The question that I want to ask in this session is, if our communities have been hit by COVID-19 or any other crisis, how do we as a community respond to trauma and loss? How do we become resilient again? And resilience is the ability to bounce back after life's disappointments, failures, pain, and loss. Beginning of 2021, after 2020, the resilience in our communities are so important in order for us to bounce back. How do we do that? And the first idea that I want to share with you is based on what Nehemiah did in the chapter. So number one, resilience kicks in when someone starts praying. Resilience kicks in when someone starts praying. Now, our normal response to crisis, our normal response to an event that is not nice, is we get a committee together and we want to plan, we want to talk about it, and then work out a plan on how to deal with this crisis. It's exactly the opposite that Nehemiah went the opposite way. Nehemiah said the following in Nehemiah 1 verse 4. He did the following: when I heard these things, that the walls are broken, that the city is in disgrace, that the gates are burned. This is what he did. When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. So Nehemiah, instead of getting people together to start planning, he went to God to find out what God's picture was of the city. So our first step in building resilience in our community is to approach God in prayer. Just something important here, especially when we think about engaging in building the resilience within the communities. The amount of prayer that we need to put in for our community is directly related to the change that we want to see in our community. If I put it in another way, if we want to see big change in our community, big change to go back to what we know, we need to pray a lot more in order to, through God, get that done. Through the whole Nehemiah, you will read, every time Nehemiah went back to God and prayed. Every single time he went back to God and prayed. And later in the book, we even find a space where while they were building, they were praying. While they were working, they were praying. So the first step in resilience is not to make plans, not to get a committee together. First is for someone or some people to start praying. Secondly, resilience increases when you prepare well and then start working. Resilience increases when we prepare well and then start working. Remember, resilience is our ability to bounce back from difficult situations. In Nehemiah 2 verse 13, we read the following. By night I went out through the valley gate toward the jackal well and the dung gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem, which has been broken down, and its gates, which had been destroyed by fire. So in chapter 2, Nehemiah 2 verse 13, Nehemiah at night starts a journey of inspection. Nehemiah decided after he started praying, I want to go see for myself what the situation looks like. In any crisis, we need facts. In any crisis, we need to go examine for ourselves what the real situation is and then starts working. Now, ladies and gentlemen, in these times when our communities are threatened by difficulties, the one thing that people tend to do is they become pessimistic. And the argument is, as an individual, I can't contribute anything. I can't do anything about our situation. It's out of my hands. Maybe government need to do something, or my neighbor can do something because he's more skilled than I am. He's got more resources than I am. Now Nehemiah says, whoa, just for a moment, I'm not going to become pessimistic. I am going to not just start, but make sure that I know what the cost is before we start working. What can I offer? If I look at what I have in my community, what can I do? What can I offer to contribute to getting the resilience in my community up, to assist my community in becoming better through difficult times? So start looking around, move closer to the problem, and then we need to start work. So number one, we start resilience if someone starts praying. Secondly, our community becomes resilient when we prepare well or investigate and then we start working. And then thirdly, resilience grow when we work shoulder to shoulder together. I want to repeat that. Resilience grow when we work shoulder to shoulder together. In Nehemiah 3 verse 2, I found this verse, and the whole chapter of Nehemiah 3 is just a chapter of names and people who build next to each other. The family of this did this. The family of this next to them did this, completed this, rebuilt this part of the wall, this section of the wall. And in Nehemiah 3 verse 2, the men of Jericho built the adjoining section, and Zakur, son of Imri, built next to them. The word here is next to them. So the picture that Nehemiah is creating here is the following: that a family builds here, and next to them another family builds on the same wall but just next to each other. Everyone came together, which made the community resilient again, because this is now our project. Broken wall restored, burned gate restored. And what happens while we build is our hearts are turned back to God, and we now give God back what is actually His. The boundaries that were shifted, the boundaries come back into place. And we become committed to God again, and we offer to God what is His. Now, throughout the whole chapter 3, Nehemiah 3, and I wondered about this because there was a name and difficult names. They did this and they did this. So the question is, why would Nehemiah write all of this down? The reason I found was because when we engage in building our community, as we build the kingdom, every single person's contribution is important, however small. And in this chapter, some people, one person was a goldsmith, someone else did something else. They were not skilled in building. They were not skilled in construction, but they offered what they had in order to build the resilience in the community. So after we have done this, after we engaged in prayer, after we looked at the situation and we found what the real problems were, and we started working, and after we came together as a community and we stood shoulder to shoulder to build together, what is the outcome? The outcome is, and I want to read to you what Zechariah 3 verse 10 says, "In that day, each of you will invite your neighbor to sit under your vine and fig tree, declares the Lord Almighty." That is a beautiful picture. In that day, each of you will invite your neighbor to sit under your vine and fig tree, declares the Lord Almighty. Many years ago, as we grew up, when I was a bit naughty, my neighbor would just grab me, give me a spanking or just a hiding quickly, and then afterwards tell my mother and father, this is what I did, and that was okay. That was protection in a community. That was community where everyone knew everyone else's name. I'm not saying that this is applicable to today. What I'm saying is, when we have community, it becomes ours. Your child becomes my child. My brother is your brother. And that is community. There is a calmness, a peace, and there is we call the person, we can call loudly to each other and still feel like family. It's a place of rest, it's a place of safety. We can sit under the shadow of the fig tree and the vine. I want to conclude by reading to you Exodus 2:24 and 25. God heard their groaning, and He remembered His covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. Whenever there's a crisis in our communities, whenever we are confronted with difficulties, and there are struggles ahead, and people around us are struggling, God is concerned about that. And when we start turning our face and our hearts towards God in prayer, secondly, when we get closer to the situation and we have the willingness to dirty our hands, to get involved, and we come shoulder to shoulder next to each other and we stand, that is when God smiles upon a community and pours out His blessing on the people, because He is our God.